So it's a major breakthrough in the investigation of the death of a local man's brother. After more than 30 years and a hard-fought battle to get police to even take the case seriously, back in 1988, Scott Johnson had been living in Sydney, Australia with his partner when his naked body was found at the bottom of a beachside cliff. His clothes were folded at the top, and police quickly decided it was a suicide. But the finding didn't sit right with Scott's brother Steve, especially after he learned in 2005 that there were at least 3 other cases of gay men who were found dead near cliffs around Sydney in the 1980s, and that the area had a history of gangs attacking gay men. That's when Steve started looking into things himself and pushed investigators to reopen the case involved in his brother's death. In 2012, the suicide determination was overturned, and the cause of Scott's death was changed to open finding. After that, several other families came forward with similar stories. Many of them, including Scott's, were chronicled in a 2016 documentary called Deep Water.
Everyone knew about it. The remarkable thing about the Scott Johnson death is that this denial that North Head, particularly Bluefish Point, where the incident happened, wasn't a gay beat. What a load of bullshit. They failed to look at local incidents. And there have been incidents up and down the northern beaches involving assaults on gay men for years.
In 2015, for just the second time in Australia's history, a third investigation was launched into Scott's death, and through it all, Steve somehow stayed optimistic, as he told me right here back in 2017.
The fact that we're making progress and that there are persons of interest, the stage that we're entering now, for the next 6 months, the coroner is going to be overseeing an investigation of a long list of persons of interest that still live in the neighborhood. We think there's hope.
Turns out he was right. As evidenced by the 3-word email he got from police in Australia last week, it just read simply, "Offender in custody." Steve joined me earlier this week. Congratulations. What did it feel like when you got that email, when you got the call? Can you describe the feeling?
Well, first, you have to remember where we were sitting last week. We're sitting in the middle of a global pandemic. Yeah. I had been back in Australia in March, so about a month and a half ago, with the commissioner announcing that I was doubling the reward they had posted, because they had indicated to me that they were getting very close and that they needed a little bit of a push from the community. So I got on maybe the last flight out of Australia to Boston on March 14th and been sitting in my house since then. I get a call from the commissioner just when I think, how could there be an investigation at a time like this, who told me shortly there will be an arrest. And then I sat tight by my phone, and a day or two later I got the message, offender in custody.
And what did that feel like to you after 30 plus years of pursuing justice for your brother?
Well, it was unbelievable, literally unbelievable, especially that they got it done during COVID-19. Yeah. The team that the commissioner put on this case worked their hearts out. In fact, the lead investigator was hospitalized for a non-COVID related illness just 8 weeks ago and had on his door Strikeforce Wellsford HQ2 to indicate that he was not giving up even from his hospital bed.
You know, I'm sure I'm about to tell you something that you don't need to hear from me, but you've spent more years of your life chasing justice for your brother than your brother was able to live on this planet. And it's hard to ask this question, but were there moments in these decades, concluding last week, when you were saying to yourself, maybe this just isn't worth it? It's not going to bring your brother back?
Sometimes we're put on a mission that we didn't choose. I don't think there was ever a time where I felt like giving up. I'm not sure I predicted that we'd actually get this outcome, but I never felt like giving up. I think Scott would have done the same for me.
And it sounds to me from what I read, I think it was the New York Times, I'm not sure where it was, that the trickle-down or trickle-out impact of the work you've done may be felt by families beyond yours. I read that, I think it was New South Wales, they looked at a quarter century of deaths, maybe 88 deaths or something, and concluded that roughly a quarter were a result of anti-gay violence. Are other of these cold cases, others of these murders, do they have potential of being solved as well?
Well, I think what the commissioner said to the Australian public just a few days ago was he went after Scott's case, not just for justice for Scott, but because of the several dozen other cases that have never been solved. Oh. And so I'm really hoping that the families find hope here and that this opens the door to solve some of these other deaths of gay men who never got justice.
You know, it seems to me the most important part of your quest here is your relentlessness, which is just a factor of one's character. But it didn't hurt that you had a lot of resources, too. You mentioned that you doubled the reward recently. I think it was $1 million in Australian currency. Obviously, you were able to hire investigators, able to travel back and forth from Australia. Do you think at all about those who were in similar circumstances, who weren't fortunate enough to have the resources you did to do what you did in your brother's name?
Well, first of all the men who died deserved a voice, and I really hope in some small ways Scott provided one. I think that I did not do this alone, and there were only a handful of people who were even being paid. And when I was on your show 3 years ago, Martha Coakley was sitting with me, who worked on this case on behalf of her firm, Foley Hoag, on a pro bono basis.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And so many of the people who joined the fight did this because they thought it was important.
You know, one of the mysteries that continues for me, the man that your brother went to be with in Australia is not only alive, but is in Boston and works at BC. And in every account I've read, has been silent. Do you know why?
I don't exactly know why. You know, I think he never wanted to be in the limelight. He encouraged me several times along the way. Yeah. So I think we managed to get it done despite his reticence.
You know, can you take the last minute? We know more than I'd even like to know about how your brother died, but I don't know if I've ever heard you talk about your brother's life and what kind of person he was. Can you take the last minute and do that, if you would, Steve?
Well, they used to say in my family, Steve's passable, but Scott's the smart one. And Scott graduated at the top of his class from Caltech in Pasadena. He went off to Cambridge University, where he fell in love with the Australian man that he moved to Australia for. He was really one of the brightest mathematicians of his generation. He actually stopped here in town and worked with me at the Kennedy School in the 80s, just before he went off to Australia, and collaborated with a couple of the economic professors there just before he died. And 3 papers that he wrote with them were published posthumously. So he was quite a brilliant, kind, gentle. I've gotten hundreds of emails. Everyone described Scott the same way: kind, gentle, and smarter than the rest of us.
Well, let me tell you, he had a hell of a brother, too. Congratulations to you. It's really an incredible story, and I'm really happy for you.
Thank you, Jim. Thanks for having me on.
Steve, thanks so much. Good luck.